Of course, that is where we begin today with our big story. Israel launching a show of military force against Hamas militants, pounding Gaza with more airstrikes and expanding its historic call up for troop reserves. This as concerns are growing that this crisis could spread. So joining me now is our Republican congressman from Idaho, Russ Fulcher. And thank you so much for joining us, Congressman. And first of all, you know, we just heard here from Netanyahu that in his call with the president, we know they've had 3 of them, that Netanyahu said that this is worse than ISIS, that they should be treated that way. The horror has been widely publicized, and he is now comparing this to the Holocaust. What is your reaction, and how far will U.S. support go?
Ken, I gotta tell you, I've seen probably 20 to 30 megabits of footage that has come from people on the ground there, and I can't disagree with what the Prime Minister said. This is an absolute atrocity. We have hostages now, and we have abuse that is just unthinkable. And I think it's America's position to stand behind them. And I think that Congress, once we get put back together here in the House, I think is going to do exactly that in a very strong way.
Yeah, I know that you have called this genocidal eradication of Israel, and you came out strongly supporting Israel very early on social media. Of course, though, let's talk about this lack of a House Speaker on Capitol Hill right now. You voted against removing Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. So will this conflict, do you think, provide a bit of a shared mission, if you will, for members of the party to sort of coalesce around a replacement and get things moving?
It certainly provides an urgency because, as you're probably aware, U.S. House cannot function legally on the House floor without having a speaker. And so this definitely adds urgency, but it's not the only thing. We've got the border security issue. We've got the inflation issue. We have the appropriations process that's underway right now. The Israel situation has definitely added to it, but the House has got to get its leadership in place so that we can function on the floor. In order to support formally incremental monies to Israel for this effort, the House has to be in session, and we can't do that without a speaker. So it's definitely added urgency.
All right, we know they're having these closed-door meetings. We're hoping that this gets on track soon. The world is watching us. Let's talk about funding for Ukraine. It was a major sticking point during the last government spending battle. Another deadline now, just about a month away. So where do you stand as Democrats weigh potentially tying Ukraine funding to Israel aid?
I think you've got 2 completely different things there. With the Ukrainian funds, my understanding is we've done well over $100 billion already. And so there's a number of us, myself included, that believes that we should be focusing on how do we do it other ways? What's the cost to Russia that we can incur in this process? You know, the Ukrainian government is, it's technically a democracy, but it's kind of a hybrid. It functions as a dictatorship, almost, as you will. We all know there's some significant problems with corruption there. Israel, on the other hand, has been our longtime ally. We've got a memorandum of understanding for defense with them we've had for a long time. They're really the first in line for a defense of the U.S. when it comes to terrorism, because the problems with terrorism it comes from the same place in the U.S. that it does against Israel. So that is an established democracy as well. We get tremendous intelligence from Israel that we don't from any other place in the world. So 2 separate things, and in my view, need to be looked at separately when it comes to support from America.
So you do not support bundling them together, even though Ukraine is saying they need more aid. But, you know, President Biden, he spoke today, and he's urging Congress. He said to take urgent action on funding to Israel. And he went on to say that it's not about party or politics, but the security of the world and the security of Americans. So in your opinion here, what are the next steps? And how can Republicans, Democrats, the White House come together in this conflict, confront it in a bipartisan way?
Well, once again, because Israel has been such a long-time ally, and because we get so much from that relationship, I can't overstate the amount of value that we get in terms of intelligence information from Israel. Frankly, I'm a little surprised that this happened without them apparently knowing it and in such a large scale, because they are very, very good with intelligence. And so Congress just simply needs to get its leadership in place. I think once that happens, you'll see significant bipartisan support to support Israel. Once again, I see that as an entirely different situation than what we have in Ukraine. That needs to be handled separately, appropriated separately, and debated separately. But I believe that once we get the speakership in place, you'll see Congress act quickly in a bipartisan fashion to support our long-term ally in Israel.
And our staunchest ally as well. I really appreciate your time, Congressman Russ Fulcher out of Idaho. Again, thank you very much for your time and your perspective. I want to bring our big story to our panel now. So joining us today here is our ABC News contributor, Mike Muse, Democratic strategist, Alencia Johnson, ABC News political contributor and former Trump administration official, Sarah Isker, and former senior CIA operative and ABC News contributor, Daryl Blocker. Thank you all so much for being here with us. And Sarah, let's start with you. Having served in the Trump administration, now watching this chaos on Capitol Hill as this conflict in the Middle East is escalating. What is your take on what the congressman said there? And he really stood strong in that he does not think that the funding for Ukraine and Israel should be together at all. He says it's two totally separate issues.
Well, as a lawyer at the Department of Justice, we're actually in a very interesting legal question of what the House can do without a Speaker of the House. Obviously, the Speaker of the House is mentioned repeatedly in the text of the Constitution, and yet we don't really know what can be done without a Speaker. You know, he said that no legislation could move without a Speaker. I don't know that it's quite that stark at this point. You have Democrats, for instance, on the House Rules Committee saying that as well before the attack on Israel. But I'll be curious to see whether you have sort of movement in the House to say, let's push forward regardless and you know, see where that goes. As far as tying Ukrainian aid and Israeli aid, you know, I think at this point, you get what you can get done as quickly as you can get it done. Tying them together is obviously going to slow them down. I think there might be political reasons for one side or the other to want to do that. But if you actually want to get aid to Israel, just get it out the door.
Right. And Alencia, to you, we now know the number has gone up when it comes to Americans killed, 14 confirmed, some 20 are unaccounted for in the region. Is it time for Democrats on the Hill to make some concessions here to bring order to Congress in face of this conflict and again, get things moving?
Well, you know, the death toll is extremely alarming for Americans as well as the Jewish population, as well as, you know, people on both sides of this conflict. The reality is there is nothing but chaos in the House right now. And it is unfortunate that the United States is in this position when for so long we have been this world power, right? This beacon of hope, this country that many people turn to in times of crisis. And I do believe that Democrats will potentially have a very real conversation with Republicans. But the reality here is that, and this is something that President Biden is facing, is that the Democratic Party has a nuanced perspective of what is happening in the Middle East, right? You had Speaker Jeffries talking about how they are supporting Israel, and yet there are factions of the Democratic Party that actually has a more pro-Palestine view. And so it will be an interesting conversation to see how Democrats show up in this moment to ensure that a speaker is elected and that the U.S. can do what it needs to do in support of Israel.
And Mike, to you, as we sort of get out of the Beltway for a minute and you think about how the American people are viewing this conflict as this war intensifies, and I know that this is an area of the world that you know well.
It is. I've been to Israel a few times. I've actually lived in the kibbutz. That has been part of the conversation that doesn't get talked about much. Kibbutz is a very special community throughout the entire country of Israel that is very communal and community-based. I have a really close family and friends that live there and actually have an individual who has been called up to the Israeli army as a reservist to serve his country during this time of conflict. What is really fascinating about the kibbutz is that because of such atrocity that has happened to the kibbutz, unlike any other area of Israel, they are a family as a whole and a collective. So once it happens to one, it's like it happened to a direct family member. The interesting thing, too, Kana, that doesn't get talked about much is that the kibbutz is very a leftist style of politics, and they are very pro-Palestine. And so it's going to be curious to see what will become the outcome now after witnessing all the slaughter.
certainly in how they will view their counterparts there. And Daryl, to you from an intelligence standpoint, this was brought up, by the way, to our national security advisor today. And we know that this initial attack by Hamas, it was a failure from an intelligence standpoint in Israel. But what about the U.S. intelligence community? If they're our staunchest ally, is this something that the U.S. missed and could have seen coming as well?
I know the knee-jerk reaction is to call it an intelligence failure. I would say it's a all-of-government failure on the Israeli side, being pulled away by the internal factions. The Hamas has run this more like a suicide mission than a ground invasion. They don't seem to have a long-term plan for this. And so when it comes to something that is this well coordinated, this has been planned for a while. So there should have been indications. There are now indications from looking at some reporting that's out there that people were apprised that maybe the Egyptians had brought this to the attention of the Israelis as well. But intelligence failure kind of minimizes the fact that this is a much larger issue that we're going to be dealing with.
Mm-hmm. And Netanyahu was quick to say that they did not get a warning from Egypt in the aftermath of this. Mike Muse, Valencia Johnson, Sarah Isker, Daryl Blocker, thank you so much for your time, and please stay with us. We have a lot more to talk about.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.